Hey, you guys, what's up? It's your girl, Dia Direct, and welcome to the Superpower Her podcast. We're live today. We're being fancy about it, okay? So listen, today's show is called So You Want to Be an Influencer? Everybody wants to be an influencer. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be an influencer? And what kind of influence do you want to have? Well, today we're talking about using your influence for good. In fact, we're talking about healthy influence, if you will. So today joining me are my very good friends. Look, we're good friends, but this is the first time we're meeting in person. But we've been talking for a very long time. So first, hey, Mary.
Hey.
Mary Renoff is here. She and Melissa, they're both with Providence St. Joseph Hospital. Mary, you are the senior vice president of...
You're just making up titles of everything now.
Look, you are the assistant vice president of National Communications Influencer Strategy with Providence St. Joseph Health and Wellbeing Trust. And Melissa, you are the social influence director.
Yes.
Right? So what does that mean? Because, first of all, Providence St. Joseph Health has been a great partner with the podcast, and really being able to, as you know, we've been talking a lot about mental and emotional health and well-being. So important for all of us, especially if you're going through menopause like me. Oh, I said it in public. Oh, God. Okay.
It's okay. You know what? Everybody does it. That's the thing. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. So now, but with you all working for Providence and Wellbeing Trust, what we'll talk about, we don't usually think about influencers around health issues. Right. So what does your job entail, and why do you care about having influencers engaged, and what do they do?
It's a great question, and it's really interesting. So both Melissa and I come from a background in sports and entertainment where we did a lot of influencer outreach and marketing, a lot of social and digital. And when Providence called and said, hey, we want to really make healthcare sexier and we want people to start talking about it, how do we do that? Influencer was one of the better ways to do it. Obviously, you've got social marketing because everybody wants to talk about it. Like you said, everybody wants to be an influencer. But how do we really start the conversations around healthcare? Because at the end of the day, everybody interacts with health in some way, right? On any given day, you're sick, your mom's sick, your son needs a sports physical, you know, your dad's going to chemo, any number. It could be a dentist, right? It could just be that you have a anxiety that day. So really getting people to talk about health was really important to us. And so influencers are really a way of doing that in an authentic way. Because just like you said, right now I'm going through menopause. Yeah. Do you know how many people listening, watching are going through menopause or have gone through menopause, didn't know about it, didn't know what was normal, didn't want to talk about it, felt embarrassed, and now they're like, oh, well, let's talk about it, right?
And you need people who create a safe space to say me too, like the other me too.
Absolutely.
Right? Because I actually just found out that that's what's been going on with me, that I'm going through menopause, and it explains so much.
You didn't know, right? Because nobody talked to you about it. Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with the influencer marketing, it's nice because you actually can talk to a target, a group of people you're trying to reach, and this person is part of that market, right? Yeah. So they actually can influence that group, and they can speak to something that if a doctor were to say to you, you know, don't eat this, it's not good for you, you're kind of like, meh, all right. But when this influencer steps up and, you know, is telling you, I did this wasn't good for me, all of a sudden you're like, well, maybe I'll think about it. Yeah. I won't eat that. I won't do that. Yeah. So
we actually, it's a great example. We had a vaping. A lot of clinical experts, mostly everybody through our system is finding that vaping is really bad for you. Yeah. I mean, it shouldn't be that surprising, but it is to a lot of people. And young people have been vaping now for 2-3 years.
And they're getting super sick.
They are, and it's causing so much trouble. And so our docs really wanted us to try to get a message to young people that this is not good for you. Don't do it. If I put a 55-year-old doctor in a lab coat and a stethoscope, you're not going to listen.
Not at all.
Right? So we went out and found...
Especially if you're using like technical terms and all that.
Right? Yep. The words that are above them, and I don't know, it's like my grandpa telling me not to do something, right? I'm going to tell him I'm not going to do it, I'm going to go do it. So we actually found a young hip-hop influencer who was part of the national Stop Smoking campaign, and he started talking about vaping and what it was doing and real-life examples of his friends, and we had a great engagement, and everybody on his post and his video was talking about, oh, I didn't know this, I'm going to stop, I'm going to tell my mom, I'm going to tell my sister, I'm going to tell my brother, I'm going to tell my cousin. I love it. No doctor would have been able to move the needle that much, right?
So that actually brings up a good question because what do you consider an influencer? If you want to be an influencer, it's good to know what companies look for in an influencer. Do you have to have 1 million followers? Like all of that. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when we say influencer, everybody assumes celebrity, right? Katy Perry, Kim Kardashian. And sure, there's definitely influence in those spaces. I mean, if you wanted to have a makeup line, Kylie's probably the girl for you to go to. When we talk about health, though, it's really who's making you feel safe and trusted. And mostly, that can definitely be a big name. I mean, we work with Ryan Seacrest, right? And he talks a lot about mental health and what he's gone through and what he knows because he's very influential with everybody, with moms, with kids, with teenagers, coaches, parents. But when you actually want to start talking about, say, an eating disorder, I probably want to talk to somebody who I'm more connected with than just a general person out there. And so an influencer to us can be a big name celebrity, it can be an athlete, it can be anything like that. It could be a fitness blogger, it could be a professional runner. Sometimes it's a chef, but oftentimes too, it's just a local person. So like we had a situation where unfortunately there was 2 suicide attempts and more actually health issues in a small community, in a community that we serve, which is Spokane, Washington. And so we found a music artist who had grown up there, and he came and he talked about it. But we also connected with the local high school football players, and they talked about it, and they made it okay to say, I'm not okay, I need to talk to somebody. And so very influential, but would they have considered themselves influencers? Probably not. And are they influencing just a very small community of maybe 5,000 to 10,000 people? Yes, but that was a very important 5,000 to 10,000 people.
So full disclosure, literally, you guys, when I started the Superpower podcast, the whole point of the podcast was to almost be an answer to social media in the sense that it really does influence us. It really does have such an impact. And there are all these studies about how social media is impacting young people emotionally and mentally. And obviously, there's so much good that happens with social media. So I'm not trying to just say that it's all negative, but what I also know for sure is there are people, women in particular, who are secretly looking at everybody else's profile, curated profile, feeling bad about themselves, comparing themselves. Maybe you're really doing good in life, but all of a sudden, because every week it seems like somebody else, Susie Q, is on the boat or flying to Paris or
Got the Gucci bag.
has the new purse and is always talking about her promotion and you're like, well, my unemployment check is about to run out. I'm one paycheck away from homelessness as an important issue that we've been talking about. And so you begin to, it starts to affect your self-esteem. You start to feel away and you're like secretly suffering and nobody knows. And so what I wanted to do was to use women of power and women with powerful stories, both influential from the perspective of maybe their numbers or celebrity, right? Or who have such amazing stories that you're like, how did you make it past that, right? To bring these women together and to say, hey, this is great in my life, but yesterday I was under the bed.
Right, couldn't get out of bed.
And because we're more than one thing, right? Or these are some challenges that I've had, whether it was divorce or depression or whatever it may be. And these are the tools, these are the steps that I took to move forward. And the reason why I share that is because literally, when I launched the podcast, invited these women to a private dinner, and Mary saw the posting on Instagram. This is how you know it's powerful. She saw the posting on somebody else's page, my girlfriend Nikki, on Instagram. Hey, Nikki.
We love you.
Really do. And so then, so you finished the story from there.
Yeah, I called Nikki and I said, this is a beautiful proposition. This is exactly what we're trying to do every day. And how do we find people who influence, especially in a community like Dallas, right? But then nationwide. And of women.
Social media is national.
How do you bring women together? And especially in this Instagram versus reality thing that you're talking about, which is, right, exactly. What you see is not what you get, right? You only see what people want you to see. And how can you find these women who have come through things like abusive situations, having been homeless, medical conditions, being fired for no reason? These are things that impact millions of people every single day, and nobody wants to talk about it. So if you can find women to talk about it, or anybody to talk about it, really, but in this case, women, right, powerful women, to encourage a whole nother generation of people to start talking about it before it becomes a problem, or talk about things like menopause and not be embarrassed, because I can't control what my body everybody does,
Listen.
right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or the things that we can control, what do we do?
Exactly. How do you
Right?
get educated?
Get the information.
Exactly.
People who've gone through what you've gone through, and they can give you solutions. So, talk to me about some of the other topics that you guys are focusing on, and why it's important for Providence,
Sure.
a hospital, to focus on more social issues, for example.
It's true. I'll jump in, I guess. I think it's important from a health perspective for a couple of reasons. One, the healthcare system is broken. We all know that.
Sure
I mean,
is.
nobody's going to argue with you about that, right? And for us, as a not-for-profit healthcare system whose mission is to serve the poor and vulnerable, we don't turn people away. So we are getting
How do you
more.
make money?
We don't. Really, we don't. It's sad because what happens is we will take anybody and we will treat anybody. Our whole mission is to serve the poor and vulnerable and to be a voice for them. And so
Can you
in
come
this,
to Dallas?
I know. Well, we are in Lubbock. We are in Lubbock, so we are growing. We are trying to actually have we have telepsych, we have telehealth. We're working on other ways to access a bigger community. But for us, when we look at something like Medicaid, we're getting assistance from Medicaid, but we're getting a small amount. And I'm making up a number, but maybe it's like 32 cents on the dollar. Well, we still have to pay the doctor. We still have to pay the light bill at the hospital. We're not going to get any more money from the government, and healthcare's not getting any cheaper, unfortunately,
No, it's
no
not.
matter what we do to try to
No
make it
matter what,
cheaper,
yeah.
right? So for us, it's getting prevention. How do we get people to make the health changes that they need so they don't get diabetes, they don't get lung disease from smoking? So for us, it was finding influencers who could tell that story. So like we have a lot of people who talk about diabetes and prediabetes and how do they change their lifestyle. Mental health is a big topic for us as well. And then, we have the whole social advocacy side of it as well. But I don't know if you want to talk about some of the other types of health things that we do. Like we've got psoriasis, we've got everything you
Yeah,
can think
we
of.
really do. Yeah, we find some different influencers who have gone through, maybe it's a heart attack or different.
Lots of cancer.
Yeah, lots of cancer. Yes, people who've gone through these situations, and then we allow them to tell their story and how did they find out and what were they doing and were they scared? And so it really connects with people. And yes, I was scared when I found out that I had breast cancer, and here's the process I went through, and they kind of help people get to the next.
They normalize
yes,
it.
they normalize it.
Yeah. And it makes it safe, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, and even
It's real.
we were
It's not
talking
made
to
up,
people about homelessness. Talking to people that were homeless, and like you had just said, these people have MBAs. These people are. It could be you, and so what was it that either helped them, or what was the process, and so that people look at homelessness maybe not as. The homeless people, like this could be.
Homeless. That's what people always think.
Yeah.
They choose to be homeless.
Well, listen, I'm guilty, right?
Yeah.
So we had a conversation with Dr. Dora. Make sure you watch it or listen to it.
Dora's amazing.
And I have to say that I feel like even just going through like life issues or whatever, sometimes you don't become sensitive to things until it's at your doorstep. But having that conversation, just really observing what's happening in large cities in general, including places like Dallas, but all over the country, where big metropolitan areas in particular, the rents are skyrocketed, right? And so people are either being underpaid, or they can't afford anywhere to live. Or an issue that I'm really sensitive to would be like domestic violence. And you don't necessarily think about these mothers with children as homeless, but basically when you're running for your life, that's what happens in many cases, and they don't have anywhere to go. Like, let's say you move in your transplant, where do you go? What do you do? And to know that the typical homeless woman is a mother with 2 children, like these are things we don't know. And so it was really cool to have that conversation, and then to have it in the context of how you all deal with it as a health organization, and that you partner with other organizations to kind of address it. So in the spirit of talking about influencers and all that, who are some of these, like tell me like your biggest names maybe that you've worked with and what you talked about.
We work with big names. We work with Lady Gaga. That's one of the biggest names you're going to find from a mental health perspective.
Yeah.
And we actually worked with her foundation to create mental health first aid training for kids in school so that they understood what to look for and they understood how to know if they were going through something or how their friend was going through something.
So the signs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, we took it a step further. In Oregon, we actually helped a group of youth create a legislative bill and get it passed so that they can take mental health days.
I
Yes.
saw that.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? It's so amazing. It's so amazing.
I love it.
I mean, we're so blessed to work on these things. But, we work with a lot of different names and a lot of different people. And I think a name that you maybe wouldn't think is as big, but somebody like Dizzy Wright, who's a hip-hop music artist. And the reason I say him is that you were just talking about homelessness. And we brought him in because one of the topics we wanted to talk about was homelessness. But we wanted to talk about it from the perspective of Medicaid, which was during the time, not the last election, but in a voting period, that we were trying to get the word out in 6 or 7 different states that if you were voting a certain direction, you were actually voting to cut Medicaid. And what people didn't know is that they were on Medicaid, right? So if you're in California, you're on Medi-Cal. If you're in Washington, you're on Apple insurance. So you don't know Apple insurance is Medicaid unless you actually dig into it. So what we were finding was we would tell people, hey, don't vote to cut Apple care because you're going to lose Medicaid. And they'd be like, I'm on Apple Care. They didn't know they were on Medicaid. So we worked with Dizzy because we wanted to bring attention to the fact that people needed to vote the right way, and he talked about how he had been homeless. And it was a random event that happened in his life, and he and his family ended up living in a car for a while and then a homeless shelter. And he had never told his story really before, and he actually got very emotional, and that's not typical for that demographic to get emotional on camera, and he actually let us share that story. But what was amazing to us and how we knew we'd picked the right influencer was that we're in the middle of this shoot, and he's talking, and one of the people asked him a question and said, why is it important for you to tell people about Medicaid? And he goes, I just don't understand why anybody would vote to cut it. It's this great program, makes no sense. And he's talking to me off camera, even though we're recording. And he's like, why would anybody cut it? And I was like, oh, you just nailed it. That's exactly what we're trying to explain to people. There's no reason for you to want to cut Medicaid. It's helping this underserved community. And so I think sometimes it's finding influencers who are passionate about it because they have that lived experience, right?
So okay, just because you're talking about Medicaid, I think, are there some myths around who actually can qualify for it? Because, you talk about a certain demographic, but, who actually qualifies for Medicaid and what does it do?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting that most people don't even know who's on Medicaid, right? So, it's 7 out of every 10 babies born in the United States is a Medicaid baby. And so that's a big number. I mean, that's 70%, right? And most people don't know, but you can actually have a dual income home and not be able to afford having a baby, right? Veterans, a big portion of veterans are on Medicaid.
I mean, how expensive is having a baby?
It's so expensive.
You guys know.
It's true. And if you have a baby with medical needs or you are a high-risk pregnancy, you are probably going to need Medicaid at some point. There are people who have health insurance and working full-time, but their health insurance is not going to cover a chronic condition that they have, and so they will have to apply. So even if you're fully employed, you already have insurance, you can still qualify in some states, right? And you don't have to be at a certain income level. It's very much income based, but it's not just income based. So it has a lot of impacts as to, do you have housing? Do you have safe housing? Do you have a medical condition? How many children do you have? Do your children have medical conditions? So it really varies by every state. And so if you don't know, you should always check, because there's no stigma around being on a government assistance program if you need it for your medical care, right? I mean, there's definitely abuse of the system. We all know that happens, but that's where having people tell their stories, because we've had a couple influencers who had been
Dizzy. Keeping with the Dizzy, he actually got hit in the eye. He said that when he was little, he was at the homeless shelter playing some game, gets hit in the eye, and could have lost his eye, but because he had Medicaid, all this stuff was taken care of. But those are the things people don't think about. It's not like, you cut your, it's not huge things. He was playing outside. I think that he said someone was snapping pennies. It was something super random, and a penny hit him in the eye, and he said because he had Medicaid, he can now see. And so I think that people, it's the extremes, right? It's people can't see that it's for everybody. It's not just the really poor, and I think that that's part of the problem again, is it goes to, who's on Medicaid, and
there's a lot of shame. There's so many of us who are just living in shame, and sometimes it just takes a personal story, because stories are the most powerful thing. Everyone has one. Everybody has a story to tell, and when you tell your story and you know that it can change your life, to me, that is the most compelling thing you can do, and it's so powerful, right? So if you guys have questions, if you want to be an influencer, if you want to know what they look for in an influencer, anything that you want to talk about as it relates to being a healthy influencer, of course, just we're live.
We love
We'll
questions.
take your questions, okay?
I do think it's important, though, to talk a little bit about what we look for, because I think people always think the high numbers, right? You have to have 4 million followers or whatever, and it's really not about that. I can let her talk more about like how we actually vet people, but I think what people need to understand too is what's your relevancy to the healthcare game, right? What is your lived experience? Have you had a health condition? Has somebody in your family been impacted? I mean, we've had football players whose babies were born with congenital heart disease, right? You wouldn't think football player congenital heart disease, but it's out there, right? We have football players that are diabetic, but it's also, are you passionate about the topic of healthcare? Because we have some people who help us, exactly like we talked about, like voting. How do we raise awareness to voting? Right now, we're working very much on the trafficking side of things. We really need to bring awareness to the fact that trafficking is growing in leaps and bounds. It is a huge number.
What trafficking is?
So anybody who basically is sold into a sex trade, not by choice. And I think what most people don't know is that a predominant amount of people, especially children in the United States who are sex trafficked, are actually brought into trafficking by their own parents. So it's not that they were kidnapped at the playground, which definitely happens, but most of them are brought in because their parents are addicted and need money, because their parents are addicted and not paying attention, right? And so what we're finding, though, is that this number of trafficking cases is growing so substantially, especially in the I-5 corridor, especially in Texas when you look at the borders. And we don't have enough resources for these people. So there's a really important message in educating people about the signs to look for, and that's where influencers can help us. Because if you influence, especially healthcare workers or people who come into contact with sex trafficking victims, which is often on public transportation, it's in grocery stores where you're seeing them use assistance programs, medical facilities, that sort of thing. Knowing the signs is important, but also voting the right, especially in an election year, voting for the candidates that are going to help move these things forward, help paying for healthcare, help make healthcare more affordable. Focus on trafficking things, because at the end of the day, even if we were to go out and find all these people who are in trafficking, most of them don't want out. It's not that they don't want out, they're afraid, or they know no other life. Right. And so we get them out, and we have great partners and programs that do that, and they go right back in if you don't have a way to help educate them.
That's right. You have to have an alternative.
You do.
Right? So what do you look for in an influencer?
So normally with influencers, we look at obviously what they're posting. We don't want someone with the healthcare side who's posting really negative things or really crass, or we want them to be authentic about what they're posting. There's some influencers who may have 10 ads, right? So they're working with 10 different people, and we don't want to be just another list. Like, we want someone who's willing to be a partner and really willing to stand up for what we're doing. So we're not looking for, just like we were talking before, the 4 million. We're not going to pay someone a lot of money. Instead, we want someone who has the story and actually cares. Yeah. So again, numbers, what they're posting, how often they post, how often people respond to them. Like, are they engaging with people? And
Relevancy.
Yeah,
really.
relevancy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how often should they post? Because some people, here's the thing, because like recently I was just talking about having a social media fast, because sometimes, that's an addiction in and of itself that can be unhealthy.
Yeah.
What are you looking for around, like, how often they're talking or posting stuff and all that?
So, for instance, we post with Providence, we post about once, like if it's Instagram, or, we try and post once a day on Instagram, maybe once on Facebook. Twitter, obviously, is a little more active, so you're posting more often. I think it depends on what they're saying, what they're doing. A lot of the videos now, video is what's out there. There's a lot of the algorithms, you're trying to reach your audience. And so you need to figure out, how can I do that? Because organic posts aren't always working. So I think it depends. It really depends on the topics. And
if you were going to give advice, like if anybody's listening is asking how often do I post, I think the one thing we could give people a tip on is that consistency is key, and especially to fight this algorithm situation, it's very much consistency.
You can't keep up with.
It changes every day. Right? I mean, it's impossible, right? And so what we tell people is try to be consistent, so that if you're posting every day, you're posting every day around the same time, right? And that people get used to seeing it. So if you're posting videos on every Monday, your audience is going to come every Monday to see your video, right? And if they're engaging with a certain kind of content, continue down with that content. Don't just do the content that's easiest for you, or the content that you like, or the one that makes you look prettier, if that's not the one they're engaging with. And so
That's so true.
Yeah, it's really knowing your audience, right?
And that's communications 101, isn't it? Like knowing your audience. And what I find too, which is interesting, like you said, sometimes there are the things you prefer to do versus the things that people respond to. And so in knowing your audience and in being effective, you want to give people what they actually want from you. Right. So your audience really teaches you what to do. By how they respond.
Yeah, we were listening to an influencer speak, and she actually was saying that she does these programs that are an hour. They were an hour long, and she said that they found out that her people, it was opening promotion. Yes, it was like promotional items and opening these things, and she found that people liked 2+ hours, and that is where she had the most people, and it was like they were watching a movie, and so that's what she would do 2 hours, even though that's 2 hours of being on. Yeah. So, because she liked the 1 hour, she thought that was perfect, but found it didn't work. So you really, like you said, you have to figure out what it is people want to hear.
You also have to be willing to be an influencer even if you don't want to. I became an influencer by accident, sharing about my fitness journey. And I did it for the first 2 years of my journey, and I talked about it, and I showed pictures of running and what I was eating and my fitness tracker and all of this.
And how much weight did you lose?
120 pounds. Yeah, it was a big goal, you know, and very much a health and wellness.
Good.
Thank you. We like it.
Girl.
But, I stopped posting because I hit my goal, and now I'm in maintenance mode. But I started hearing from people like, oh, that was inspiring to me. I wanted to see your runs. I wanted to see what you did on your runs. I wanted to hear how your success is. And I was hearing from like hundreds of people I didn't know that I didn't even know were following me. And they were saying, we want to know more about your journey. I didn't ever want to be an influencer in that space, but now I feel like I owe it to them because I got these great stories from people saying, you motivated my daughter to lose 100 pounds. She's going back to college now, right? You motivated me just to go take a walk every day. And so it's one of those things that everybody's an influencer, they maybe just don't know it. So find out what you're influencing and who you're influencing. And maybe you want to be influencing people about beauty, but you're actually influencing them about pet care because you're posting about your dogs on a regular basis. What do people want you to talk about?
But keep in mind, there is a responsibility around that because you really have to realize that if you're out there and people are listening to you and you say to them, this is a good product, this works, you need to say it works for me, or if it didn't work for you, it didn't work for me. It caused me to have stomach pain. It caused me, because people are looking to you, and you can't be offering bad information or on your journey. Like, you may have not run one day, right? And you need to share that because then they feel like, I didn't run today, and so that I'm okay then. I'm not going to fail.
What a great point, because you actually just posted, because you've been talking about your journey, and you recently posted that, hey, you know what? I've been off a little bit.
Off the wagon.
I fell off.
The holidays are hard.
They are, but that's the part, because what happens is then you start to feel this need to be perfect, which it defeats the whole purpose, and so you feel judged. Again, I just feel like there's so much shame and judgment that's happening. So to be able to say, I fell off, but I'm still here.
I'm going to pick it up.
That actually makes you more relevant, because most people are falling off during the holidays. Hello.
It's tough.
Listen.
It's true.
So, you've certainly influenced my life. And I've just had a great time talking to you guys. I'm sure questions will probably come even after we're done. But I want to thank you for really just taking on this journey and teaching us about not only what it means to be an influencer, but to do it in a healthy way, and how you're doing it with all these different topics around our health, literally from rooter to tutor, right, from head to toe. This stuff going on, and we need.
Episode the other day where we said it's okay if your poop's not okay, and I was like, well, I think we've officially hit like the general population.
Listen, you know I love to go like just below. I scare people. I like to go really in. So that's right up my alley. So that's great. No, that's really, really great. So guys, make sure you tell people about this particular podcast. You check out Providence St. Joseph Health, and also like them on Facebook, like them on Instagram and Twitter, and also Wellbeing Trust. And so as we close, just tell us what Wellbeing Trust is and how the information that you share can be helpful to our audience.
I think it's a great way to end it, by the way, because I think with Wellbeing Trust, it's a mental health initiative. It's the whole point behind it was to make, the mental health, the spiritual health, the physical health of the country better. We really started with the youth. How do we get ahead of it, especially using social media? How do we remove stigma? How do we educate about it? And then how do we help people take action? That's really where that action piece comes in. So Wellbeing Trust is really focused on the mental health side of things. I think influencers have been really interesting in that space because you're finding more and more people willing to talk about their journey of anxiety, depression, suicide attempts, that sort of thing, even in their family. You'll find influencers talking about losing a close family member, that sort of thing. I think the key on that is influencers is if you have lived experience and you want to share it and you want to be an influencer in that space, just like any topic, really, it's being respectful and responsible about it. So if you post about something with depression, monitor your comments. If somebody says, I'm done, help them find a suicide crisis line. If somebody says, I need to help them find a resource. You can't just post it and assume that everybody's going to be okay, because what you're often doing is ripping the Band-Aid. We spoke with a UFC fighter who talked about her husband's suicide completion and then the PTSD that she and her son suffered after that. And not only did her following across social start asking a lot of questions, and we were able to jump in and answer those questions, she then went into a depression afterward, and we had to be there for her. So if you're going to ask people to tell their story, be prepared to help them through that journey, because you're not taking advantage of, that's not the word, but you are ripping somebody's Band-Aid off to help other people, so then be prepared to help that person. And I think that's where a lot of brands maybe fall through on the influencer side, is really following that whole journey. So.
Right. So if you decide you're going to share something, really consider everything beforehand, because I know it's scary putting yourself out there, and then you have to deal with the judgments that people have. Everybody may not receive what you have to say well, and so resources like Wellbeing Trust are there to kind of even show you how other people do it. Right, so that it can give you an example of, oh, okay, that's a good way to approach it. Even strategy, right? So listen, guys. This has been good. I'm your girl, Dia Direct. This has been another Super Power Her podcast, where women of power and women with powerful stories testify. Oh, and the men too, the ones that love us. You know what I'm saying? You got to make sure you love us, all right? All right, until the next time, we are at superpowerher.com.